Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to start this new student conference. It's a new year with new presenters. I'm very excited about the work they did, the outcome of weeks and weeks of working on this paper. This time, this year, the conference will be on what philosophy can do. It was almost magical because things came together very spontaneously from different angles. Both the keynote speakers and our students, presenters came with different ways of looking at philosophy and how philosophy can help in different areas of our life. So, yeah, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker is Joshua Hedgecock. He's been doing a fantastic work on Kierkegaard, and today he's going to present on what we can learn from the birds and the lilies. So the floor is all yours. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you. Let me pull up my paper. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for all your help, Dr. Federello. The title of my paper is What We Can Learn from the Birds and the Lilies. And first, some Kierkegaard background. Søren Kierkegaard, 1813 to 1855, was a Danish philosopher and theologian who was widely considered the father of existentialism. He was the author of many works that often focused on the human condition, which included concepts like anxiety, despair, faith, and individual existence. Kierkegaard was brought up within the official state church, the Lutheran Church of Denmark. Søren's father raised him strictly Lutheran Orthodox and passed on guilt to his son along with his melancholy. Quote, his father was obsessed by guilt and the memory of having as a young boy once cursed God, end quote, Alden. This he believed had cursed the family. His father died while he was engaged in his theological studies at the University of Copenhagen. Though this made him deeply saddened, he continued and got his master's. His mother, though he didn't write about her much, was an important part of his life. She originally came from a lower class social background, and Søren felt a serious connection to her. Meanwhile, while Kierkegaard was still searching for his purpose, which happened to change course when he fell in love and got engaged to Regina Olsen. He had loved Regina too much and didn't want his melancholy to affect her. He felt that he was unfit for marriage and felt that his inner struggles would hurt her. In 1845, with Regina in his thoughts, he wrote The Stages of Life, where he examined life into three parts: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. He further explained these stages in his Christian Discourses, where he used the parable from Matthew chapter 6, verses 24 through 34 of the Bible, of the birds and the lilies, which happens to be the focus of this paper. And now the introduction. In his discourses, Kierkegaard uses a Bible verse from Matthew to mimic our human life through the analogies of the lilies and the birds. In the case of the lily, he was perfectly fine living next to a beautiful stream until the bird came flying down and put different thoughts in his head, tempting him with a tale of a beautiful field full of lilies living together in happiness. This made the lily feel lonely and second guess his own living situation. The bird offered to uproot the lily and fly him to the field so he could be with the others. Once the anxiety was so great and he could not help himself, he took the bird up on his offer. However, on the flight to his new residence, the lily began to wilt and perish before reaching his goal. In the second story of the wood pigeon, she was happy collecting food for just what she needed for that day, completely content with never a worry. Until one day she met some tame doves who lived on a rich farm, who told her of stories of how they never had to worry about food and they had plenty saved up and will never starve. The wood pigeon became envious of them and began to worry about his food supply and came up with a plan. She would sit with the tame doves overlooking the farm and at the end of the day, fly into the coop with them. However, the farmer noticed the strange pigeon and put her in her own separate cage. The next morning, she was killed by the farmer. Kierkegaard uses these analogies of the lilies and the birds as teachers of silence, obedience, and trust, as the path to overcoming human anxiety through a true and personal relationship with God. These Bible verses, begin quote, show that we are not supposed to be self-sufficient, but are summoned to trust God with a whole, undivided heart, end quote, Silva. It is our faith and trust in God that will relieve our anxieties. These discourses reflect the three stages of life, which will be explained in detail throughout this paper. The first stage, the aesthetic stage. Kierkegaard defines the first of the three stages of life, the aesthetic stage, as being devoted to pursuing immediate gratification and avoiding boredom. We search for passive enjoyment and are never satisfied. We are always looking for the next best thing. In the analogy of the lily, he was perfectly happy with the beauty and surroundings of living in silence. There was only the beautiful sound of the stream. He was perfectly content and satisfied with his being. He had everything he needed to sustain his life. According to Kierkegaard, the bird was living on his daily bread, not too much, not too little, just what God provides him. Beginning quotes. Here it appears that the bird is a teacher. It is such a situation to judge by the outward condition. One must call it poor, and yet it is not poor, end quote, Kierkegaard. He was not poor at all, perfectly content. That is until the bird put alternative thoughts in his head. At this point, the lily is in the aesthetic stage where he began to be bored with his surroundings and looking for something better. Could the bird represent a challenge or a lesson from God as a way to test the lily's faith? Or was it to create a path for the next stage of life? The lily compares his current existence with something he now believes is a better experience. Because of this, he had developed an uncontrollable anxiety that would ultimately lead to his demise. The same would be true for the wood pigeon, who was perfectly content collecting and eating that day's bread. It wasn't until the tame pigeons began to brag, not having to ever worry about collecting food ever again, that they were always provided for. In comparing herself to the other pigeons, her anxiety began to build for an easier life, which ultimately led to her death. Beginning quotes. All worldly anxiety has its basis in human beings being unwilling to be content with being human and under the influence of comparison, becoming anxious, desirous, and being different in some way, end quote, Kierkegaard. According to Kierkegaard, both the pigeon and the lily are models of a quiet trust in God. Beginning quote, but what does this silence express? It expresses respect for God, for the fact that it is He who rules and He alone to whom wisdom and understanding belong, end quote, Kierkegaard. They both existed in the presence, finding their contentment in simple things and in each moment. It was when they became affected by outside influences, they began comparing themselves to others, and the lilies and the birds were tempted for a new, easier life. They began to live in the aesthetics life of the relentless quest of new pleasures and to help avoid boredom. At this time, they became distraught with their current life and anxious about finding a better one. They both lost their trust in God's ability to provide for them. Next section, the ethical stage. According to Kierkegaard, the transition from the aesthetic stage to the ethical stage is the leap and is a matter of choice. The aesthetic stage is unsustainable. The continuous pursuit of pleasure and new sensory experiences eventually lead to boredom and emptiness. A person in this stage chooses to live a life according to duty and universal ethical principles. However, one begins to realize how hard it is to live by these demands of moral life, and eventually it leads to guilt and despair. Kierkegaard believes that at this point, our failures can only lead to one thing, a personal relationship with God. Like the two parables, both the lily and the pigeon had total trust and obedience to God. They were never had anxiety or had to worry about their food, their daily bread, because they knew that God would provide. Kierkegaard says that a true Christian believes God will always provide, and it is the heathen that worries about such things. Quote, in comparison to ungodly melancholy of the heathen, the bird which poverty is without the anxiety of poverty is carefree. In comparison with the pious faith of the Christian, the carefreeness of the bird in the light-mindedness, end quote, Kierkegaard. For the birds and the lilies not to worry about their circumstances, their next meal, or their future. They simply exist in the current moment, trusting God. It is this trust that Kierkegaard presents as the model for human life. Next section is the religious stage. And lastly, there is the final stage. Kierkegaard considers it the highest and most difficult of the three stages to achieve. He argues that human anxiety occurs when humans are caught between two conflicting powers, the world of God and good and evil. It is having to make a choice that causes conflict and worry, which is the root of human existence. This stage requires you to be your authentic self by taking a leap of faith and developing a personal relationship with God. Kierkegaard states that this form of true obedience requires us to be silent and reflect our own plans and forget our own plans and to be open ourselves to God's will and plan. The relationship will rise above the pursuit of any pleasure and the following of moral or of universal morals. Sorry. For Kierkegaard, this is what it means to be a true Christian. Beginning quotes, to the lowly Christian does not walk into the snare of optical illusion. He sees with his eyes of faith, and with the swiftness of the faith that seeks God, he is at the beginning. He is himself before God, content with being himself, end quote, Kierkegaard. The difficulty at this stage is absolute obedience to God, embracing the absurd and the irrational. This is an example of the birds who gave us in the Gospel of Matthew. They were completely content with their lives and never had to worry about where they would get their next meal would come and where it would come from. They had absolute obedience and belief in God to provide their daily bread. The lily and the birds live in the moment and are free from any torment over life's possibilities. For Kierkegaard, it is faith, obedience, and the commitment to God that relieves our anxieties. The belief that God will take care of any needs we face. This is the ultimate goal in life, to achieve the state of belief and joy that does not depend on any exterior circumstances, only to have faith. And the last part, the conclusion, what we have learned, what can we learn from the bird and the lily? Kierkegaard interprets, or an interpretation of Christ's teaching is still relevant in today's society. It is a reminder for us not to get too anxious with things that are out of our control. As we learn from the fable, we cannot live our lives in comparison to others, and we need to accept our own imperfections. It shows us through the example of the birds and the lily how to live life of silence and obedience and trust in God's plan for us. They had developed a deep respect for God's sovereignty and acknowledged him as the only source of wisdom and understanding. Beginning quote, just as God has called us to greater righteousness, a broader love, and a deeper piety, he calls us to trust in his provision by seeking him first in faith, end quote, Silva. The lily and the bird were silent and did not question him. They had full trust in God to provide them and never had to live with anxiety. Kierkegaard's message for us is that peace can be found in escaping anxiety. It is found in a true relationship with God through being humble and having trust. If God provides for the lily and the bird, he will surely provide for us. And last beginning quote, there I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. And that concludes the end of my paper.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And the floor is open for questions. I thought about you. Yes, go
I have a
ahead.
question.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that paper, Joshua. I
Yeah.
so there's a question that I have about these thoughts about the relationship between freedom and anxiety in Kierkegaard. And it seems that even even say trusting God, I think
Yeah.
Kierkegaard would agree that even that assent would include anxiety, a kind of anxiety. I think he associates anxiety and freedom in the sense that we have a choice to believe or not to believe.
Yes.
And in the sense that, well, I guess that there seems to be dynamics at play in which uh, it's not a once and for all like uh assent to trust in God that will put a person at rest, but it's a continuous life that a person lives that sort of generates like a continuous anxiety. Uh, because
Yeah,
it seems like in each in our life we have to make choices all the time. And so
exactly.
how how do you think we could reconcile this sort of rest in in trusting God, but also
And
living life with the anxiety to having to choose in every moment?
yeah, when writing the paper, I saw when I got to the religious stage, and I totally understood why he said it was the hardest stage to get to. Because I'm like, as a Christian, I'm like, can anybody ever personally reach this stage? I think we're all going to have our anxieties and just with everyday life, and it's something that we can't turn off. And I think he understood that because his whole life he was always living in despair and anxiety, and that's why he never wanted to get married because he didn't want to bring that upon anybody else. So it was something that he always tried to search for an answer for. And I believe even himself, he never made it to the religious stage because it was something that's just so hard to turn off, you know. But that's about.
Thank you.
But good question. Sure, thanks, Josh.
Other questions? Yeah, Magnus, please.
See if I can turn off my, there's my microphone is on, right? Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about, well, being a psychologist, well, I do know about Søren Kierkegaard. Is
Yes.
not too far away from actually where I'm sitting, where he actually was at, because I'm in the southern part of Sweden right now. So it's very
Yeah.
close to Denmark in Copenhagen. But in that sense, I'm just thinking about in the sense of the personal relationship that you talk about to God, the personal relationship,
Yes.
that's probably very prevalent in the sense of its focus in that time when he was writing, right?
Hmm.
And versus the what he was actually would argue against, I guess, in a sense, against the formal relationship to God. More
Exactly.
like, yeah, yeah, exactly. Can you elaborate some of that and how that
Uh,
would relate to that time period or something? Did you get a sense of that
yeah,
when
of
you?
course.
Yeah.
Because every his main thing was like kind of the church as an institution.
Mhm.
Like at the Church of Denmark being a state church, his biggest complaint was once somebody was born, they were baptized, and then they were part of the state church. And his whole thing is we have a church full of people that don't know what it's like to be a Christian. And these people don't want to be here. It's the state church. So he preferred to not listen to the propaganda and stuff that the state church was putting forth and just worked on his own relationship with God, which is similar to these are kind of the people that I study because in Norway, they have, Hans Nielsen Hegge, which they considered their one of their prophets. That was like the same thing because Norway was also under a state church, and they were being told what they could tell people, and that was when they had the Conventicle Act, and they couldn't meet more than three people. So I think with both of them, they just didn't. The church was in a sense getting in a way with their relationship with God,
Yeah.
and it could be applied to today's church because there's it's they don't want you to be a pietist now is a bad thing, and because you have your own relationship with God and you're not in the church and you're not tithing and you know probably just got myself in trouble, but yeah, so I think that's what he was, and he would go out of his way. There was something I read about Kierkegaard that there was a coffee shop right across from the Church of Denmark, And he would go there and have a cup of coffee right as church was letting out, so everybody could see his rebellion towards the church.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think he just wasn't a big fan of any kind of institutional church, and he wanted people to be he wanted Christians to be Christians that wanted to be Christians.
Mhm. Yes,
If that makes sense.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Joshua.
Oh, of course. Thank you for the
Yeah.
question.
You got to turn on your microphone.
That's beautiful. And a little reminder, there's a nice interview of Joshua and Magnus on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it. We have time for one last brief question if you have it in your pocket, or otherwise we move forward. Mary, please.
It's very brief because the questions earlier already expressed some of what I was curious about. But one of the things is, what can philosophy do? And I think you've already addressed it, Joshua, in your comment, that today, there's Christians are still struggling not only with being a part of an institution, but being a part of an institution that is becoming increasingly fragmented and
Exactly.
has, branches that are completely inconsistent and are politically woven. And, I mean, all of that. I was wondering if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, that was part of like my inspiration for the paper, and part of why I read about the people that I do, because that's the way I feel with it. It's getting too institutionalized, and people are going to church and they're like, I'm going to hear Pastor so and so, and they're forgetting the whole purpose in going to church. It seems to be getting watered down. You go in on Sunday, you punch the clock, and then you're done for the week. But there's more. Being a Christian by definition is walking with Christ and living the life of Christ. And besides that hour a week, not a lot of people do that. So, and that's where I think the institutional churches are failing us. So, thank you for the question.
That's sad. Yeah. And I know that you express this in your job. I mean, you are working hard. You're not just writing about that, but you are doing every day this. Thank you so much. You did an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes.